Anthony Burgess, a 30th novel just published, 30 novels, 20 other books, great readership, vast reputation. Are you content with what you've achieved?
Well, I would contest this business about the great readership or the great reputation. I've always regarded myself as somebody who does the job for a living, primarily, but I'm not content. I don't think any writer is content with what he's done. I think the whole business of writing is so difficult that one hopes that one can someday write a good book. I say that with total sincerity. I think we're so aware of the faults in every book we write, the faults which spring from ourselves rather than from defective technique, that one hopes someday to present a better self in the book one produces. In England, of course, one is always told that, one writes too much, but I think we're sort of subject to the influence of people like E.M. Forster, Virginia Woolf, T.S. Eliot, who wrote so little.
Yeah. Are there faults in the last book?
Oh, yes, but I won't point them out. I'll leave that to the critics. One breathes a kind of sigh of relief when the critics have not noticed a sticky patch, and indeed sometimes praise the sticky patches, eminently well done. No, I'm well aware of the faults of the novel, but this is true of every book I write.
Do you care about the critics?
Unfortunately, I do. One never gets over that. I think even Somerset Maugham at the age of 91 could be hurt, and I'm especially hurt by a particular review, which I won't specify, in a particular paper for which I write, which seems to me to be a personal attack rather than an assessment of the book itself. That does hurt a great deal.
Do you hesitate to pick them up, or do you turn to it straight away when
No, I think I'll leave that to my wife. I think wives have certain functions. That's one of them, to look at the reviews first and say, my wife who's Italian says to me, Antonio, don't read that.
But then you do read it.
One is led to it eventually, probably a year later or something like that. But when the book is fire hot, fire new, when the reviews come out, one is somewhat hesitant about this. Yes, I've read a lot of reviews, produced in the past, say, 20 years. I'm not hurt any longer, but I sometimes feel that there's more personal enmity in reviews in this country than people really know.
You write under the name of Anthony Burgess,
yes.
But it's not your only name, or even in a sense your real name.
No.
In your autobiography, we meet a young fellow called Jackie Wilson,
yes.
who is uncertain of his future.
Mm-hmm.
Is he still around?
He's still around. The full name is John Anthony Burgess Wilson, and there's a very simple reason for adopting the middle names for writing. I was in the Colonial Civil Service in Malaya, and now Malaysia, I believe, and in general, one was not supposed to produce anything light-hearted, such as fiction, under one's own name. One was in a serious job. You could produce a monograph on local dialects or something like that, but you couldn't produce a novel. So I chose the two middle segments of the name and more or less stuck with them. I answer to any name you like, but sometimes Jack, sometimes John, but more often than not, my wife calls me Antonio. That's my name.
But if Jack Wilson is still inside you, as he must be, I mean, it's he who's taking this, I'm not absolutely sure I'm this great
yes, I think
success.
it's a lot in that. I quite accept that. We always have a problem of identity. The Jack Wilson comes back occasionally. I was in Manchester last year, and I was signing a few books in a bookshop, and an ancient man came along and said, I'm your nephew. And another man, equally ancient, said, I married your niece. And various people I did not recognize, who were very ancient indeed, called me Jack. But the real Jack callers are nearly all dead, alas.
You have happy memories of Manchester in your childhood?
I suppose it is my town. One never really gets over this kind of local patriotism. We had I think everybody has a rough time. Had a rough time, certainly in the 1920s, 1930s. A pretty bad time for everybody. I think what really was the problem in Manchester was this divisiveness. I think being a member of a Catholic family, living in a Protestant city, the first thing I ever learnt about was this divisiveness and indeed this bigotry, which of course still goes on.
Two ways?
I think it went one way because the Protestant majority was pretty vociferous, and the Catholics were rather subdued. I remember what goes on in Northern Ireland now was going on in Manchester in my youth. The Catholics called us, the Protestants called us Catholics, and we call them proddy dogs. And we didn't really know what the issue was. It was rather like dealing with two different races, and I suppose the association with the Catholics was Irish. We were supposed to be Irish.
That may be a good thing for a writer to have in his childhood, that sense of division, and make you look more critically at the world.
I agree
more
with you. I think this
curious
shows you what the human predicament is. We're a long time getting towards this notion of universality, that we're all human beings. Indeed, we're worse off than ever we were, but we won't go into the Rushdie business, I hope, for the moment.
Tell me about your childhood. Did you ever know your mother?
No, at the end of the First World War, there was this tremendous pandemic, or epidemic of influenza. I think it was the sheer vindictiveness of whatever god there be or was in imposing this ghastly epidemic on a world that had already suffered enough from the war that lately made me feel that religion was rather dangerous. I'd rather not believe in God. The fact was that my mother and sister died within days of each other, which was a fairly common occurrence then. My father, I think, rather resented me because I was still alive, somebody he didn't know, whereas these two he did know and loved had died. And this, of course, applies to quite a number of people.
Who brought you up?
I was brought up by an aunt, Protestant aunt, strangely enough, who had two daughters of her own, who was a bad cook and not very sympathetic. And eventually my father married an Irish woman who kept a pub. So I was brought up in a pub.
Noisy pub?
A very noisy pub, one of these old pubs which no longer exist. It always amazes me that the poor of those days could always find money to drink. The drinking, the drunkenness was excessive. Whether this was a good thing, I'm not quite sure.
Didn't put you off it, though, did it?
Not really, no. I recognise this again was part of the human condition, getting drunk. But being brought up in a slum district, as I was, I suppose, again, was not a bad thing. It was probably better than being brought up in a rather sedate suburb. I felt, when I joined the army, for example, that I knew these people. I knew these Glasgow toughs. I knew them all already.
Did you learn, you think, early to fend for yourself?
I've not been very good at that. I'm, I suppose, rather cowardly like most people. I think that I did gain a kind of strain of fairly tough independence and a little cynicism, a certain ironic approach to life. I've never expected too much from life. I've never expected too much from other people. I think this is wise. My son is different. He's outgoing, affectionate, and has been let down so often that I realize that this vulnerability is the worst thing, is the worst possible thing you can have.
But you were protected from that. Can you still smell the smells and hear the sounds and songs and ribaldry of that Manchester childhood?
Indeed I can. I'm sorry, in many ways it's gone. You see, my mother, whom I never knew, had been a dancer and singer in the music hall. My father was a pianist in the music hall and eventually a cinema pianist. I'm very proud of the fact that he played once for the 8 Lancashire lads, who included Charlie Chaplin and Stan Laurel, Stan Jefferson in those days. This was a great tradition which has disappeared. We're a little too sedate, mechanized. I look back with a nostalgia, a sort of factitious nostalgia, because I was not there to this age. Of course, J.B. Priestley was doing it, you know, always writing about it.
But you're actually saying that you felt the family was an entertaining family. There was something of that in it.
Indeed it was. Yeah. I think the old tradition of, well, everybody played the piano, everybody sang songs. There was a certain life in the streets. Perhaps we were all ill, undernourished, poverty-stricken, but this notion, it came up, I think, with Somerset Maugham, whose new biography I've been reading, who still had this nostalgia. He wrote Liza of Lambeth, which was about this impoverished East End, but still it was more alive, more vital than anything that came after.
Getting an education must have lifted you out of that working-class background a bit, or lower middle-class background.
Well, I think that the Catholics in England, of course, have always had trouble with education. The Catholics were not allowed university education until 1829 with the Catholic Emancipation Act. And, of course, there was no tradition in any Catholic family up north of getting an education. If there was talent, you went on the stage, like the Beatles, like George Formby and the rest. I, with some difficulty, managed to get an education. With some difficulty, I had to work for a couple of years, save money, and get to the university. This, in a sense, did cut me off from that tradition. I was in a kind of literary ambience. I was more concerned with the music of Wagner and Debussy and so on than the music my father had played. So I'm well aware of this danger of education. You cut yourself off.
Catholicism was a very powerful influence on you, was it, as a child?
I think yes, it was. This it was a kind of northwestern Catholicism. It was conceivably Anglo-Saxon. You know, it was Anglo-Saxon Catholicism that had not been touched by the Reformation, but it had to be reinforced by marriage into Ireland and by having Irish priests, Irish bishops and so forth. But yes, it meant a great deal to me when I was young. I believed in hell. I believed that the host was really the body and blood of Christ. I accepted what the priest said. And this fear of hell still persists.
Still persists in you?
I've no means of proving it does not exist. And I gather our present Pope, well, I know that our present Pope, John Paul II, before he goes off to Castel Gandolfo for the summer, usually comes out with some minor bombshells such as hell still exists, don't forget that. He probably does.
Are you a believing Catholic?
No, I don't think I am, but I don't know what the term means, you see, because if for several generations or indeed centuries the religion has been instilled into a family, it's in your bloodstream. Yeah. It's very hard to get rid of.
You're not a practicing Catholic?
Well, when I go to Italy, I meet a few priests whom I admire and like, and I go to their little Renaissance churches to hear Mass in Italian.
You hear Mass?
To hear Mass,
yes.
well, to participate.
Do you go to confession?
No longer. No, this is bad. I suppose one should go to confession, but I don't know. I don't think I can. I think that I'm probably right in being a little scared of all organized religion now.
Why do you call your, I think, marvelous autobiography Confessions? Why do you call that The Confessions?
Well, exactly. That's a very shrewd point to make. I am, in fact, confessing. This is a kind of literary equivalent of going into the confessional and saying, you know, blessed be Father, I have sinned. Off we go. I think it's one of Graham Greene's characters.
Can you get absolution from the general public?
Probably not. Not from a Protestant general public. I've had odd letters absolving me from the crimes I present in the book. I don't know. I think the confessional tradition in literature, as well as in religious life, is probably a good thing. We burden our minds with past sins. Regrets, all kinds of inhibiting forces. It's probably best to get them out occasionally. The confessional is probably a very good institution. Nowadays we have the psychoanalyst, which costs more.
Do you still feel guilty?
Oh, yes. Guilty as hell.
Yeah. What about?
I don't know. The fact that I don't know what I'm guilty of, probably for not treating people well, not treating my wife well and so forth, not treating other people well. But I think I'm inclined to get back to the old Judeo-Christian doctrine of original sin, which seems to me to explain the guilt. We're born with something guilty in us, which then finds rationale, you know, in Auschwitz or what you will. The guilt is there, waiting for a subject to, as it were, justify it.
Do you accept, and does that help you to an understanding of other people's guilt, as it were?
I think it does. It also means that one is never really surprised. What happens. One was terribly surprised.
Betrayed, ever?
Betrayed? I think we're always betrayed. We must always expect betrayal at some time or other. One must not expect too much. This is because the guilt in oneself does relate to the imperfections in oneself, which are part of the human condition. In
the autobiography, there's a very frank account of your relationship with your first wife.
Yes, indeed.
Were you more hurt by that, in fact, than you let on in the book, or not?
I suppose, yes, I think you're right. I think one way of, as it were, shedding the sense of betrayal was to get it on paper, where it becomes something else. On the other hand, we're all free. My first wife was Protestant Welsh. The Welsh, I think, on the whole, are more sexually given than the other Celts. I mean, the Irish drink, the Scots drink. They're not a very sexually minded race, either of them. But the Welsh are given to that. My first wife honestly believed that free, indiscriminate sexual congress was not a bad thing, because this prevented one from identifying with love. She said love was a different thing altogether. She may have been right, but as we know, when we see, then the knife comes out. We can't so easily overcome our primitive instincts. Yes, there is a certain measure of sense of hurt, betrayal, but this is all over now.
You say somewhere that one of the reasons you live in Monaco is that it's a Catholic place and that there's a sense of homing about it. Is that serious?
It's one of the reasons. When I married again, I married into Europe. Yes, there's a certain sense in which that is true, that if one hears the Angelus bell at 12 and sees people occasionally making the sign of the cross, you feel you're home. I've never had much, much pleasure in travelling to the Protestant south of this country. I feel that London is an alien city in some ways, a Protestant city, with a Protestant monarch.
Try Kilburn.
Well, I know.
But Monte Carlo seems to some of us a sort of camp for rich, displaced persons.
Monaco.
Yes, rather than a home. Is that not? There's not something in that? There are a lot of exiles there.
Yes, a great number of exiles. On the other hand, it is a genuine Catholic principality where I feel a little at home. Unfortunately, what you say is true. There are too many exiles from Milan, indeed from England, people with money. I gather there's one policeman to every 5 inhabitants. That's to protect wealth. I'm not wealthy being a writer. But one has to live somewhere, and to go into the reasons why I'm there would take too long. But the fact is I was living in Italy with my wife and our son was going to be kidnapped. I was told this by an ex-mafioso, and so we got into the car and ran to the next state, which happens to be Monaco. Simple as that.
You said Europe, and you have a great sort of sense of Europe.
Yes, I think so, yes.
And try to bring that into your books.
I think so. Of course, we're all going to be Europeans. We're already supposed to be Europeans. We're all going to be very genuinely Europeans very soon. I don't think the English are ready for it.
Do you feel that more than feeling English?
Yes, I think that must be so, because my family was never part of the Reformation. We never had any part in the English Reformation. We had no part in Henry VIII's church. And indeed, when James II was driven out of England, we lost our last Catholic monarch. My father always said to me, son, he said, don't give allegiance to any monarch, a Hanoverian Protestant. Your last monarch was James II. This ran in the family, and it may seem romantic and stupid. Oberon War would certainly say so, but I can assure you it's genuine.
What do you enjoy about living in Monte Carlo?
Not very much. I enjoy... what do I enjoy? I enjoy going to the casino. I enjoy seeing the valley. I enjoy breathing in the polluted Mediterranean. But the principality itself is becoming full of skyscrapers. It's becoming a commercial centre. It's becoming, as you suggest, a bold hole for people.
Do you feel English still?
Oh, yes. I think the more one lives abroad, the more one tends to emphasise one's Britishry or Englishry. I come back to England for very small things like English sausages, English cheese, English beer, pubs and the like.
Might you come back and live here?
To die here, undoubtedly. I suppose the time is coming to think about that. And my family is buried up in Manchester, Moston Cemetery. I might be ready there. I don't know. But this is a problem that faces one in one's 70s. One, obviously, by any actuarial standards, has not long to live. So one had better start thinking about death. Wasn't it Jung who said it's stupid, it's neurotic to avoid the subject of death in old age? I think he was right.
Do you think about death a lot?
A good deal, yes. A good deal.
Every day?
Every morning, yes. I think one has stupid ideas. I feel sorry for my heart. My heart has been beating for 72 years. I've got a break, got a rest. It seems unfair to a heart. I mentioned this to a doctor who said, don't worry about your heart. Your heart likes doing that.
But in the press release about Any Old Ireland, you actually tell us that your heart is thumping away quite merrily.
It's thumping away, certainly.
And you tell us that your sex life is still going strong.
Strong enough, yes. Not so strong as that of younger people, but I think the sexual instinct is very slow to be killed.
In your the novels that you wrote when you were in the colonial service,
yes.
in Malaya, there's a very particular sense of being in a particular place at a particular time. Has that gone from your writing with this search for a wider scope?
Hard to say. I must leave that to you and the critics. But indeed, you're right to mention this beginning, because I had a very strong feeling when I began to write and publish fiction that here was a place which was going to disappear from the British consciousness before long, namely Malaya, Malaysia, and it had to be written about. And I suppose there was a kind of deliberate attempt to encase the atmosphere of the place in fiction. I knew it had been done by William Somerset Maugham already, but good as he is, and as much as he's recognised as the real fictional authority on Malaya, he never knew the people, he never knew the language. I did, and I was able to write from the inside.
Was writing that sort of novel a different sort of activity from writing the grand, ambitious novels of your more recent work?
I suppose one can say that, I suppose every novelist feels, that every young novelist feels that it's great fun. The writing of fiction is great fun at first, because you're inventing characters, you're manipulating them, sense of power, a sense of delight in manipulating language too. But as time goes on, and when one has, composed one's 30th novel, one realizes that one has been playing with fire all the way along. It's a very difficult form, a very difficult art form indeed, and the disciplines, the techniques involved are tremendously difficult.
But are you now deliberately choosing to subsume great areas of subject matter into a new book? I mean, the Any Old Iron has a vast scope, both in time and in place.
Yes, but of course it doesn't deal with the present, unfortunately, except by implication. I think the thing finishes in the 50s. There's a great danger, I think, in my own case, that living abroad as I do, and I may instance James Joyce, a far higher level. Joyce was not able to write about the Dublin of, say, 1922. He had to write about the Dublin of 1904. I think I must hide myself away in some London suburb and get around, listen to the speech, read the papers, and attempt to do what a novelist should do, namely deal with his own time.
I mean, you're saying that that's not what you've been doing recently?
I don't think I've been doing that recently, but I don't think perhaps it matters a great deal. Right. Dickens didn't deal with his own time. He dealt with, about 50 years back. There's nothing wrong with that, but on the other hand, one possibly has a duty to explain to one's, contemporaries, one's younger contemporaries especially, what the world is they're living in. And the Thatcherian world is a reality, and I haven't touched it.
So there will be more novels?
If I live, yes. It's my trade.
When you returned from the East, you were told that you wouldn't live, that you would
Indeed
die.
I was, yes.
Did you believe it?
No, I don't think anybody does. Looking back now, I see that I was driven out of the colonial service, I think possibly for political reasons that were disguised as clinical reasons. My poor first wife was told that I had an inoperable cerebral tumor, and they gave me to cover themselves a year to live. She tried to keep the secret, but could not, and eventually divulged it to me. I didn't feel too bad about it. I felt it was not true. In any case, I'd been given a year. I've not been given a year since.
But you sat down and you didn't just reach for the bottle. You sat down and started to write.
I sat down with a sense of duty to my prospective widow and tried to make a little money. It was very difficult. You could never make much money with writing, to fulfill what talent I had and produce the works I did. It can be done. If you write 2,000 words before breakfast, you've got the rest of the day to yourself. And I did, in fact, produce very nearly 6 novels in that year. This, of course, didn't earn admiration. This earned resentment and sneers. Have you written your monthly novel yet, Burgess? That kind of thing.
Do you still write so fast?
No. But I think that nobody can write without discipline. You can't say, let's wait for the inspiration to come. It doesn't come. It doesn't work.
So do you sit down at a desk every morning?
Yes, sit down at the desk.
Every single morning?
Every single morning, including weekends, yes.
This morning?
Oh, this morning I'm in London. I'm on a sort of holiday. I'm with you. I mean, this is not a working day.
Do you rework what you've written? Do you go back over it?
I don't rework it. The way I write has much to do with the way I write music. You see, look at it this way, a very simple way of looking at it. The music paper, especially scoring paper, is very expensive. You can't afford to spoil anything. You'd better get it sorted out in your head, in your ear, in your inner ear, before you get it on paper. Like Sibelius. Sibelius heard the whole symphony and then wrote it down without making any changes. I like to get a page organized,
and the book
acceptable, and then the next page, and the next page, and so on.
And do you think the whole book through before you?
I don't think anybody can. I think one can roughly proceed up to a point. I think wasn't it E.M. Forster who said that in Passage to India he got it as far as the Malabar caves, but not further. And Joyce said, don't work too much at thinking what the characters are going to do. They'll take over.
Some people say that when the characters and the story are humming along, I mean, you can't resist the temptation to show off a bit, to put in wordplay, to tell us about language.
I don't know why people call this showing off. I should imagine it was... does Rabelais... Does Shakespeare show off? Does Shakespeare show off? Shakespeare's always introducing strange words like Augulus. They kissed away kingdoms. That's a very daring thing to say. But grates me the some. Antony Cleopatra is a show-off play, if you like. But I don't feel that. I don't feel that at all about my own work. I think that our Shakespeare's our great model always. I mean, he's the man we should read, learn from, and he was a tremendous player with words. Nothing wrong with it.
But they're there for our entertainment, or because they're utterly germane to the stuff
I
of
think
a
it's
particular book?
possibly an unworthy feeling, an unworthy conviction that in fiction, or in any kind of verbal art, words should be one of the characters. Words should be characters. Language should be a character in itself. I'm not suggesting that what I write is superior. God forbid to say what Freddie Forsyth writes, but it's two different ways of writing. Freddie Forsyth gives you a transparent language. You can look through it, get at the action itself. Whereas with me, the language is a bit more opaque. It's just the way we are.
Is autobiography a sort of fiction? You talk as
Oh,
if
yes.
you're...
Oh, yes, I think so. One manipulates the past to some extent. The past doesn't just flow over one. One does make the past to some extent.
How different will the second volume of your autobiography be from the first one?
The second volume is written, is completed, but it has not yet been published. The second volume will deal with the most painful part of my life, the part of my life in which I was trying to earn a living as a writer with great difficulty, in which my first wife was gradually succumbing to the fatal disease of cirrhosis, the period of her death, and then my final resurrection, rehabilitation, and life with my second wife. It ends happily, I think.
Are you writing any music these days?
All the time, but of course it's never heard in this country, never heard in England. The music is played abroad quite a number of times. I think there's some idea in this country that you can't be both a writer and a composer. But if I may boast, in this last 6 months I've had a symphony performed in Strasbourg, a work for orchestra performed in Geneva, a setting of a poem by D'Annunzio performed in Amsterdam and Sportorno in Italy, and only last Saturday a concerto for guitar and 4 guitars and orchestra performed in Cannes, and a symphony performed in Strasbourg.
What sort of music do you write?
It is what they call post-tonal. It uses a regular orchestra, regular bar lines. The rhythms are irregular. It is not Pierre Boulez quite. It doesn't avoid melody. It is, I think, occasionally euphonious. It is well structured.
Are you more proud of that than of the writing?
Well, consider, you see, sitting in a concert hall in Cannes, the Salle du Bussy in Cannes last week, with an audience, say, of 1,000 listening to my work. You could watch their faces. You're getting a response. And at the end, you get applause. You don't get that with a novel.
Some people have said, looking back at your work, that this society, critics and public, haven't accorded you the recognition that you really deserve, that we don't treat you as a great man living in our midst, which we ought to do. Do you feel that?
Oh, God forbid. I never feel myself great. I'm a little worried, I suppose, of the fact that when I produce a book, there's a tendency on the part of critics to have a bit of a laugh, you know. Burgess is too prolific. Too prolific? God said, no, go forth and multiply. As for honours, no, I don't get those. I don't expect. I get them from other countries, but not here. It's rather embarrassing. Monsieur Mitterrand made me a commandeur des arts et des lettres. I had to apply to Mrs. Thatcher for permission to accept this. But Mrs. Thatcher didn't say, oh, so sorry, we'll give you the same while we're at it. It doesn't matter.
You said earlier in this that you were still hoping to write something which put the whole of yourself into a fiction in a way that you hadn't yet achieved.
Yes.
Is there a hole, without a W, a hole in your work that's yet to be filled?
I don't. I think we're pretty well fragmented, all of us. I think it's impossible to see oneself as a whole. I think all one can do is to create characters, or try to create characters that represent some part of oneself. One can never create a single character that contains the whole of oneself. I don't know, I think even Shakespeare could do that. Characters are always fragments of the personality of the creator. Is Hamlet Shakespeare? Yes. So is Anthony.
If little Wilson bumped into Big Burgess in front of us now, what would he say to him?
Oh, I say, come off it. Or what has already been said to me in Manchester is turned into a stuck-up, opinionated bastard. Because that's the Mancunian response to anybody who's left the city and tried to achieve something in the bigger world.
Anthony Burgess, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Isaacs.